And I know that these guys are working very hard with what we're allocating to them to do the very best that they can. And I hope today that as we look at some of these issues, we can help maybe come to some of the solutions and work together. Some of them are going to be legislative in nature, and I know some of them may particularly be with the department. But in that spirit, please take it away, Ed.
Thank you, Representative Knight, Chairman O'Neill, members of the House Committee, members of the Senate. Thank you for inviting the department here today. I did have a prepared speech, but I may just go into, I guess, denial at the moment. Today's topic is about compliance and the ease of compliance, and I think that Brad was right on point. We're talking about in that area of voluntary compliance and involuntary compliance, if you will. And I will address some of the things. I think you're right, Representative Knight. A lot of what I heard today, and I think that Brad would agree, that discussion has been started with the department. We meet pretty regularly with the Georgia Society of CPAs, and as I recall, many of the things that you saw in the overhead and is in your handout are things that can be worked out with the department. I kept seeing the word rule. And the rules go through, any rule that we promulgate goes through a public comment period for at least 30 days, and we send out the proposed rule to the House Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, several members of the public, so everybody is able to comment on those rules, and we're going to be glad to be working with Brad on a lot of those things. I think he's got some good issues there. Some things we can do something about, some things we can't. And to the extent that it needs any legislative help, that's where you folks come in. I want to talk about voluntary compliance, and that's business e-file and e-pay initiatives. Commissioner Graham is on vacation, a long-deserved vacation, and I could, and speaking just as an aside, one of the comments, voluntary compliance has e-file, it has education and guidance, and it has customer service. And when Commissioner Graham came to the department, I'm sure he's told you this story, but I'll tell everybody again because I was on the other end of this story. When he came to the department 3 years ago this June, he had a senior staff meeting of all the directors, and I was out of the country at the time. And he told the story at the senior staff meeting about someone in the compliance division, which I currently head up, who had sent him a notice, an erroneous notice, Mr. Chairman, a notice, and I think it was a keying error on the return where 60 should have been, or 6,000 should have been 6, one way or the other. It was a keying error. And so I had an attorney that working for me who was a tax auditor who came and left in a short period of time to work for the FBI, and I was sorry to lose him, but he wrote a sort of a legal letter, and he never once apologized. And so the moral of that story is not one person in that senior staff meeting told me about that story until I was in some other public forum. So I thought I'd help Commissioner Graham tell that story today. Again, we didn't apologize, and we need to do a better job of that. Current business e-file initiatives. He talked about some of this last meeting. I know we talked about collectability, and we're talking about compliance. We have gone to an e-file initiative for withholding taxes, which is already online and working. And those are all our folks that are required to file electronically currently, or pay electronically. Now they have to file electronically, excuse me. And all our sales tax folks that are required to pay electronically or be filing electronically. The General Assembly allows the Commissioner to take that e-filing initiative down to a low level. Currently it's set at $10,000 a return for sales tax, and if you're on a semi-weekly basis for the federal government, you're generally on a semi-weekly basis for us, so we get it quite often, and that's working very well. Those folks will be filing electronically, so I think it'll save some problems with the returns. And I'll talk about some return things you can consider. I'm not sure that they're going to be politically palatable, but I'll talk about those in a little while. That program is working very well. Sales tax is coming online in September, and then motor fuel will be coming online. And so far it's working very well. Our IVR, or for our smaller businesses, For folks that have zero liability, for example, on sales tax returns, there's zero liability on withholding tax returns. I know the governor was concerned about not everybody having a computer out there. Those folks will be able to call in on a number and file their return over the phone. So I think that's going to help a lot of small businesses. We are currently participating in the corporate and partnership e-file project with IRS. Am I happy with the progress? No, but that's not within our control. It's piggybacking the corporate e-file system with the federal, and we're working with the vendor CCH, and they've run into some problems, but we're one of the few states that are participating in that project and one of the few states participating in the partnership project. And I'm expecting the corporate e-file, which the society is concerned about, to be online within the month. And I know they've probably heard that story for the last 7 or 8 months, but unfortunately some of that's been out of our control, and working with a software vendor, which you have to have, that's who you have to have work with you. Education and guidance. I think you heard that we do a lot of educational seminars. We attempt to reach out to small businesses. We have them all over the state. We do advertise them heavily. Some are better attended than others, and generally they're well received and you can get good information. We've done a lot of regulations since the Commissioner formed the Tax Law and Policy Group. And we've done a lot of, probably over 30 regulations in the last 15 to 18 months. That's more than we've done in the last 10 years to clarify what's out there in the law. We worked very quickly with the automobile dealers on an issue during last legislative session, a regulation was needed dealing with some loaner card issues, computer software. We finally issued that regulation in the sales tax area, hunting preserves. And we've done a number of informational bulletins, and I think our website has improved, but it still needs a lot of work. And again, all those regulations have public comment periods and are heavily advertised. Now let's deal with what is probably the critical piece of voluntary compliance, and that's customer service. There is no question that we probably did a better job getting refunds out this year than last year, more quickly. We have a new director of our processing center, and we have a new director of taxpayer services that came in March. We had a terrible year with respect to what I call returns that might evoke questions. They can call it special queue. Returns would go into a special queue for review. And I think the commissioner and I and others have looked at that, and it just doesn't make sense, because what we would do is if they went into the special review, and we've been doing it this way for years, there was always a fear that if somebody was really there fraudulently cheating the government, that once that refund went out, we would never see it again. Well, so we had to draw the line between fraudulent returns and returns that have questions, probably legitimate questions, and we released a lot of returns out of the special review queue. We did have a rogue employee that John mentioned that got fired because they questioned there was a number of returns. He couldn't pick a worse return to question than the elderly retirement exclusion. But that happened. If the information wasn't there, if it didn't make sense, or nobody bothered to look at the previous year's filings, that return was sent straight through with an adjustment. So we're restructuring our physical layout in the processing center. We're streamlining our mail opening and image preparation. We are going to try and recognize a lot of digitized information that Brad talked about. We're reorganizing our error resolution functions to expedite income tax returns, and we're adding inventory management tracking capabilities and evaluating additional imaging technology and providing cross-training. This is all happening right now as we speak because of the problems we had with this filing season. Other ease of compliance considerations. You heard earlier from the Georgia Oilmen's Association, and I heard Commissioner O'Neill's comment. There's no question that moving the tax, the second motor fuel tax and the 1% tax that goes into the general fund from the retail level to the distributor level was just a grand idea, and it's increased revenues tremendously to the state. There is one other consideration, though. I mean, we could take those 230 filers down to a motor fuel tax at the rack. There are a lot of states that tax at the rack. That's not at the distributor level. That's at the import level. But you can't do that generally with a sales tax. You'd have to convert to an all excise tax to make that work. You still have to, and if that happened, the local sales tax would still have to be collected at the retail area. But if you could move to a flat excise tax, like a lot of states have, whatever that rate is that would at least equalize current revenues, you could move it to the rack, then you'd only have 15 filers, if it's that many. There's not that many in the state, so that's been talked about before, not necessarily by the department, but it's available out there. So I know this will always raise some eyebrows. Individual income tax. It's difficult to prepare a federal return, but once you've done, you still got to take your federal adjusted gross income and go to our return. I think Representative Tumlin said at one meeting, there are some states that have a percentage of federal income tax paid. That's how they compute their tax. So you'd have one line, percentage of tax, and pay it. Very simple return. A couple of problems with that. Our retirement exclusion we'd have to deal with. You'd have to deal with the feds tax Social Security at certain levels, so we'd have to deal with that because we exclude it. Those are just a couple issues, and there's others. But one way to do it is just do a percentage of federal tax. Withholding tax and unemployment compensation filed and collected. Why not do it in the same place? Some states do. CPAs and others are preparing returns and sending unemployment compensation to the Department of Labor, and they're sending practically the same information to us. Sales and use tax. We've already heard about the myriad exemptions, the different tax rates for 159 counties. We got a different base. If you had one return with one combined state and local tax rate with no exemptions, it could get pretty simple. I mean, you would improve compliance tremendously. Tobacco products, other tobacco products. Feds tax it by weight. We tax it by value. I don't know why. It's terrible to track value. Values change all the time. How can you be sure of revenues? I heard about consolidated filing earlier. We could have unitary tax filing. We could have one consolidated tax return for all the returns in the consolidated group on a unitary basis and file one return here. Then we wouldn't have some of those consolidated issues that they brought up. A lot of those were my personal observations, by the way. Motor fuel tax at the rack, though, has been discussed before publicly, but I just give you some ideas because some states make their tax returns simple and make payment of it simple. Involuntary compliance. We have directed a lot of targeted enforcement in areas of significant noncompliance. The commissioners talked about that at the last meeting. We generally find if we've targeted the compliance, at least initial queries show that 25% of probably haven't complied, and we eventually work that down to probably an 8 to 12% level in that area. A lot of those folks end up being self-employed. Commissioner talked about those folks having licenses. I think Senator Harp at the last meeting asked, why could somebody continue to practice law if they didn't pay their taxes? So that can always be a consideration. Technology. I've got Frank behind me, who's got a wireless tablet. Technology can help us, and it's going to help us collect taxes in the field that are now due. This is all about collecting the right amount of tax and collecting the correct tax. Those tablets will allow us to go in the field, not have to stay in the office, will allow us to, and the alcohol agents are currently using them, they will print notices, they will print receipts, they will register people. If we do a run down the street and find the folks aren't registered, they'll do registrations online and send that wirelessly, encrypted, right back to the department. That's the next phase of that. And, we also are in need of audit selection software, which we can probably get some benefit out of if what Brad had talked about, or maybe the others had talked about, getting a data warehouse for the department. The cost is not inconsequential. It's probably a $20 to $22 million cost, but it will put all the information together in the tax department throughout the state into one database. And then it would be our hope that we could also have the personal property and real estate tax databases all together so that we can level the playing field out there to make sure that everybody that should be paying their taxes, including those in the tax gap, that are unknown to us. That's how you find those folks. And it's $20 to $22 million, but the estimated payback is probably $8 to $10 million a year. It would take 2 to 3 years to put it in. We'd have a lot of our notices would be far more accurate if we had more accurate data. The data would be all in one place, so somebody in a call center could look at it all in one place for queries. It would improve our customer calling back service and our inbound service. A question was asked at the last meeting about, and I think Chairman O'Neill's asked this question before, and I thought I'd bring you these averages, at least for our major taxes. Audit coverage of major tax types for sales and use tax currently is 0.8% of the universe. Corporate is a little over 1% of the universe. An individual is 0.8% of the universe. We could add probably 25 auditors, Chairman O'Neill, and bring an average in with those first years while they're being trained, 7 to 8 to 1 return. And we could, if we added 25 auditors, you might be able to raise some of those audit percentages up to 1 to 0.2%, but we're still pretty low. I don't know how much lower we are in the IRS. I mean, we do get a lot of, this doesn't count what we get from IRS, by the way. These are our own audits. What we get from IRS, we exchange information, so we already get that information. Those are audits that IRS has already done, or commonly known as revenue agent reports. We do, in terms of making our current resources go farther, we do managed audits currently today. And if somebody's wants to do a managed audit, they know who to call. We do managed compliance agreements, and generally we'll do. What does that mean? That means that generally it's a self-audit that we're managing. But what happens is that taxpayer has to commit resources to do that audit. So they do have to spend some resources to do that audit. But we manage it, we stay out of their hair, we come out and check their own work papers, we issue an assessment generally, and we waive the penalty because they've cooperated and done the work.
Let me interrupt there before you go on here, because you got right into the meat of the question. It's very important to me and my constituents. From an auditor standpoint, you know, the traditional concept is you go in to a taxpayer and audit what they've already filed with the department. But what I think of auditing or enforcement, in a sense, goes beyond that as well. And I don't think there's anything worse than a non-compliant taxpayer that owes legitimate tax, but also is not in our system at all. And do we have systems set up? But because what happens with that non-taxpayer is they become basically an unequal competitor to other businesses that are playing by the rules. And I know that you all did, for want of a different word, a sting operation at the airport recently, where somebody walked through and just literally by visual, whatever, investigation, identified 20 or 30 totally non-taxpayers at all, were never in the system, and I guess dealt with that by arrest initially and then assessment on the business. Are we also, and we got a lot of these aliens, and I'm not going to get into the politics of that, but a lot of these people don't file any kind of return. There's no knowledge of their existence in the whole world except the guy on the corner that's doing it right, and his sales are down 50% because these other people aren't collecting the sales tax, they're not paying the income tax, they're not reporting. What can we expect from the department in that regard? Because that's going to take more than just the traditional auditor with a pull-down shade and mathematical knowledge. It's going to take a guy with a badge and a gun, I think. Can you enlighten us on where we're going there? I saw some real good progress with the airport, and are there other plans? And I wish you'd say it publicly where we scare the heck out of these people.
Okay.
They know
we are
going to catch them.
That's an excellent question, Mr. Chairman. We do spend a lot of time on trying to find non-filers in the individual area and the business area. That would be my preference. rather than auditing the folks that are sitting there registered. Of course, we're interested in the people that all of a sudden their collections just fall off and are starting to borrow our money on the collection side. But the data warehouse concept would solve a lot of that. I mean, right now we have to ask to the Commissioner of Insurance, we have to ask for a list of those insurance agents. We have to ask the Board of Realtors for the real estate agents. I mean, those folks are generally self-employed, and the self-employed are the biggest part of the tax gap. So we always have to ask for that information. I guess if we, and I'm not saying we can't subpoena it, but we like to have cooperation. So the data warehouse would take that kind of data. I mean, you could add driver's license data in there. If you had a driver's license data in a data warehouse, you could find some of those folks you were referencing earlier. At least you know they're driving cars and they're in the state here, perhaps.
Or not.
Or not. But, we, something I referred to earlier when I was talking about the laptop, which allows us to go out. We went out with these wireless laptops and swept the Atlanta airport and the Savannah airport for all the vendors that are out there. And we got a substantial sum of money out of 3 of those vendors that were not filing with us currently, or had stopped filing. So it was very successful, and I think it got everybody's attention. It got everybody's attention in the city of Atlanta, too, at the same time. So, but that's the kind of thing. I mean, we need the technology, and that's been approved. I mean, we're going to roll out these what do you call it? These tablets that Frank's busily writing on. I have the worst handwriting in the world, and this laptop could recognize my handwriting. But that allows us wirelessly to go out and visit these businesses, Senator. Have I I'm not sure I've answered all your questions, Mr. Chairman, but the data warehouse would bring it together. We are doing some of it now. We match everything with the IRS. I mean, we match. So if you're the difference, though, is if they're not filing with IRS, they're probably not filing with us. So you're right. So we need more sources of information: real estate records, personal property records. And if we combine all those in together, that's who we want to focus on, are the non-filers.
Mr. Chair, pass.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
The last presenter, the last time we met, you mentioned, you share with the IRS that there were 7% less Georgia returns filed by Georgians than federal returns. Did you find that? I mean, that was one.
I can't remember if I took that note down or not. What was it again, Representative Tumlin?
Larry O'Neill and I talked about it. There was 7% less filing of Georgia returns by Georgians who filed a federal return, like the year 2000, 2001. I mean, so the gap was there, and I just, the fact we share data, I found that surprising.
Well, I must not have taken a good note on that. I will look at that. I mean, it's just hard for me to believe. I mean, we get down to some pretty low AGI levels, and they're just not worth pursuing. The reason we don't pursue them at certain AGI levels is generally these are wage-paid folks that file federal returns. And if they haven't filed with us, I care about it. But and I don't think they're trying to, we find more often than not they're not trying to hide anything, they just didn't file. And what would happen is when we do go after them and they file, we give them a refund, because they had a withholding coming in. So we don't work very low adjusted gross incomes. You get down into the $30,000, it's just not worth the effort for the amount of tax that you might get should there be no withholding. Generally, there's withholding.
Yeah, go ahead.
I understand, and your limited resources, but there's a little, I have an issue, I guess, with that, because it does matter, to me as a taxpayer. If we have money that's not due to us, it's important to get back. I follow what you're saying. If it's not worth them if it's not worth the paperwork for them to file for a return, why should we worry about giving it back? I think it leads to a situation, and maybe it's your data warehouse you need, but to know who those people are, because if it's $30,000 this year, it might be $40 next year, and it may get into a position where people aren't in compliance, and then at some point down the road, they choose not to file or are afraid to file because they haven't filed for 6 years, and they're in more trouble if they happen to owe you money. So it's problematic to me what Representative Tomlin said, that if 7% of Georgians that filed a federal return didn't file a state return, and we can't identify, if we can match them and know they didn't file in Georgia, we can know what the gross, what their AGI was, at least in big buckets of what those filings are, and we should know that.
What I'll do is I'll provide something to the committee. That 7%, I do not believe. I believe that part of that 7% eventually files because that's what the program is. I mean, we're actually working the program. I mean, we do not get the information, for example, for the 2005 returns until October of next year, because everybody that's on extension federally that files October 15th, we don't get to the following year.
Would that 7% possibly be the folks filing for their earned income tax credit? And, you know, they're the low-income people. They get a federal rebate. They don't get anything from the state.
That's quite possible. We haven't done the analysis of that.
Okay.
But that could be a part of it. They would be part of that base.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing you may want to consider for simplicity, although this probably would be a cost to it. I mean, if we didn't want to go to consider percentage of federal tax paid for individuals, you could go to the federal model of who's required to file a return. If you're not required to file a federal return, you're not required to file a Georgia return. Now, that means that there's a certain number of folks in between those two ranges that are lower income that are currently filing with us and paying some tax.
That aren't required to file federal?
That's correct. That's because our standard deduction and our exemptions, of course, are lower than the feds. So at least if you had it the same, the problem is a lot of those same folks will have withholding anyway and still have to file. But that's just a thought.
Ed, when we look at this, I seem to hear a theme as far as a centralized database, or at least the technology part of this. And I want to go back and these are some live examples that I took care of from my clients a couple of weeks ago. I know we had some notices that were going out regarding our income tax, some differences in the retirement, maybe some of the itemized deductions. But I was dealing with some withholding taxes. And I know this is part of the, we've gone electronically here, but there were notices that were sent out, and when we went to research the actual notice, you know, we pulled from the state's website where y'all had even, where the state had said, here's the tax paid, here's the date, here's the settlement. We were all with compliance here, but the notice still went out. And I don't necessarily want to touch on this so much as a symptom, but get back to the heart of a problem. I mean, when we start even going to our e-filing and looking at electronically and doing things and beefing up our technology, why are we lacking, or why are we still getting notices like this? Where's a problem? And it seems to be going back to technology or databases. And I'd like to, if you can, to go back into that issue a little bit.
I'm not aware of that particular issue on the e-file. I mean, the e-file was brand new, and I said I'm not personally aware of it. But I'd like to know about it.
Well, Dan, I'll be happy to share.
You'd be happy.
Obviously, this has.
I want to make. I mean, we want to make this program work,
Yeah.
and it's a real benefit. First of all, the taxpayer, and a benefit to the department to have that much less paper in the house. So, if there's something that's gone awry, I know we want to know about it.
I'll share this with you personally after the meeting. But going back to the technology of the computers, I know we're not talking, our departments within the division are not talking to each other, so that's generating, I know, some problems. We discussed it at the Georgia Society meeting, and finally, I think all your different divisions of the Department of Revenue are trying to talk to each other, but so far we don't have it where we're talking to each other. We're not sharing data or sharing information.
Well, that e-file project is a little different in the sense that whether or not you had the processing center talking to the taxpayer services area, and the commissioners made two management changes in that area, you know, within the last 6 months. This particular project is a brand new project, sort of out. It involves both of their areas, but is being managed outside of their areas, and I think I'd like to know what that problem is. so we can look into it. The other things that you've heard today were symptomatic of just two sides not working together, and we know we need to improve our customer service.
How can we, as far as the legislature, look into that and help? I think that's one of the questions and one of the issues we want to get out to is where are some of the solutions? How can we help?
Well, the returns are complicated. I mean, you heard from Keith. I mean, the sales tax return is brutal. I mean, I know that folks they spend a lot of money on the software to do this. The big folks can do that. The little folks probably don't have as much of a problem with respect to just sales at a mom and pop store. But the myriad of rates and the exemptions that we have in the sales tax area is just, I mean, the return is complicated. Now, the e-file will help some of that and help our error resolution because they're going to have to get it right to submit it. And at some point in time, we're going to need less resources in that area, and we'll be able to use those resources in other areas to help improve customer service. So, I mean, I think we're going down the right road. I think you've given us a lot of help in that area. I think the data warehouse is probably the next big piece on the horizon that will help on the involuntary compliance.
Did y'all request a data warehouse in your budget?
That's ongoing. We didn't last year.
I know you didn't last year. Aren't y'all in the process of working it up right now?
Well, yeah.
Are you going to ask?
It's my understanding that it's not in there.
Why not?
I'm not the commissioner.
We will.
I understand. I mean, essentially, I think it's a no increase kind of budget. That's my understanding. But that doesn't mean I'm right or wrong. We haven't submitted our budget, and it may be that it'll be in there. But I don't think it's in there right now. But we haven't submitted it yet either.
I would recommend that you look at it carefully and maybe make a recommendation, because it certainly would probably pay us dividends.
Yeah. I mean, answer your question, we did put it in the capital outlay budget request last year, but we didn't get any funding for it. So it was in there last year.
You put it in your request to OPB, and
right.
OPB did not include it.
That's correct.
That's where.
That's correct.
I understand. On a personal note, talking about being customer friendly, if you got Bobby over there in the closet, we need a customer over there. We need somebody we can talk to on a daily basis. Who's taking his place? Are you going to answer all Bobby Linehan's telephone calls from us?
Mac Chandler and I will. Call Mac first.
You know, that's almost a daily call from members of the General Assembly.
Mac and I will handle those calls, and I get plenty of them right now, Senator.
Representative Parrish and then Representative Mills.
Yes, let me ask you a couple of things you touched on. I want to ask you.
Let me get down the road. Do you need anything? No, brother. Good to see you. Good to see you. I'll if you need me. That's good.
Well, we had chemo all day Thursday. Came in last night. She laid on the sofa. I just let her sleep through supper. She gets up, piddles around. She's up and down.
Particularly the sales tax form.
We just don't know what this last round is going to say.
Maybe I'll look at the hospital.
When I hit that stage, just praying for me right now.
Can that be done largely through just within the department?
We try to do everything.
Regulation changes?
I know I had
Done everything under the sun.
Legislation on our part to allow you?
Well, we may have a miracle.
I think
That's kind of the attitude.
a lot of what you heard today, I think that we can work with the society on, and we are working on some of those things to clear up. In terms of the complexity of the returns, I mean, you have, 2 or 3 tax rates for every county in the state. I mean, that's the way the system is built. And that's a difficult thing to change.
The reason it's complicated because of the legislation that we have.
I think the sales tax primarily is complicated because of the legislation.
And then if somebody just came in and said, okay, we're going to give you what you need to improve customer service, improve compliance, and simplify, what would it be? 'Cause
We would probably put more resources in our call center. I mean, our call center is very limited in terms of the resources, so we would have more folks in that group so they don't get busy signals. We put more information out online has been requested. We would beef up our website to put more information out there. For the involuntary compliance, again, the data warehouse would be a big piece of that, if not the only piece, given the cost. And I'm trying to think on Representative Parrish on the simplicity side, what you can do with the taxes without doing legislation. I mean, the income tax return is, again, based on federal adjusted gross income, and there was a lot of exceptions to it. A lot of the line 9 customer service problems you saw this year that they've mentioned are because of the differences with our return and the federal return. I mean, that's just there. So unless we're prepared to change the model, those differences will continue to be there. But we're going to do a better job in terms of e-file. We're not going to request a lot of those attachments that they mentioned on the e-file project because they can't take them currently. We're going to digitize them at some point, but we're just not going to require them. So we can make a lot of improvements in that area, but unless we're ready to change the model, it's still going to have additions and subtractions.
And that model would probably require legislation.
That's correct.
Representative Mills?
If someone applies for a federal earned income credit and then the state taxes that as income, it would seem to me, going back to Representative Tomlin's question, it would seem that would be pretty easy to cross-reference as to whether or not we got a difference in people filing federally versus state. Is that not being done now?
I'm sure it is. I just don't have the information. That program's been in existence for the last 6 years, and from the last meeting, I did not, again, take good notes, and I haven't looked into that, but now I've promised that I will look in and do an analysis of why there may be a difference. Part of it could be that zero income, where you have earned income. By the same token, they should be filing Georgia returns because the earned income credit isn't the same. So that should push the 7% in the opposite direction. Or keep it the same, at least. That's incorrect. It should keep it the same, because those people will be filing federal as well as Georgia. One would be taxed and one would not be. But they'd still both be in the system. So I'm not sure what the reasons are.
Representative Martin.
Thank you. I guess a couple questions, and again, I don't want to be too tough on the Department of Revenue, but you're a big guy in data. What worries me about just data warehouse being the answer to the question, we have these hearings around, we've heard from people, we're trying to look at, how we reform things and compliance issues, and, we hear data warehouse, and I've been in the data business for 25 years. What worries me about that, my Paul's devil's advocate, I'll be again, is we can compare with the federal, we can compare our return for the feds today, and yet we're not sure exactly where we don't match. So I'm at a pause until we find out that to throw more data in there for us to match. You look at the sales tax situation, and we think we got it complicated when you ought to, go out to Colorado where Denver charges quarter pennies for this transit system and another third of a penny for that transit system. It seems to me, I feel like one of those things once a month. It'd be simple. 2 programmers in a month could put that thing online where it would compute for people and they could print it out. In fact, I think you guys have started to do that, correct? Mm-hmm. For the state sales tax. So I think we can help you, and maybe it's through GMA, because a lot of people, or ACCG, to make people aware that those, get you some good press on what you're doing. Because we'll be hard on you when we can to get you some good press on the things you are doing, and take those steps in moving forward, rather than just nebulous things about what we could work on.
I know you're not picking on me. I don't prepare those returns. That's what you heard earlier when he said, and he had the experience out there. Those of you that are CPAs in this room, you tell me if the sales tax return. I'm not saying that you can't do it with a computer programmer. It's been done for a long time now. But you ask whether or not it's a complicated return. I just answered the question. It's a complicated return. I'm not saying change it. But you do have, you did hear about accruals of use tax, you did hear about audits, you heard about all our differences. We do have a lot of exemptions that those taxpayers, some benefit from, some don't benefit from, or they're not sure they're exempt or not exempt. So there's 80-some exemptions out there. I know Chairman O'Neill's looking. His sunsetted those now, whenever they come up, so.
Any more questions from the committee?
One last thing. Ed, we're interested in any suggestions that you have based on your long and varied experience both at the federal level and the state level, which is commendable, on how we can legislatively deal, obviously we can't deal in the department, legislatively deal with the burden of compliance, both from the standpoint of the collector of the taxes, whether it be city government, county government, state government, and from the standpoint of the taxpayer. So as we conclude all of our meetings this fall, any ideas that you have, any suggestions, I just want to reassure you over and over again they are welcome to this committee, and they don't have to come in an open forum like this. Just get them to David or I or whoever's chairing a particular meeting, and we're interested in working with those, and we will appreciate it.
Be glad to do that, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank Ed for, first of all, for taking that. I know that was a lot of questions. I look out into the audience, and I want to say thank you for the ones who remained here today. This is certainly a complex and a very complicated issue, as a lot of the questions and comments have been made. The last thing I want to do is make sure or take any questions from the audience, any public question and answers. Anybody would like to make any statements? We certainly appreciate that, senators, our representatives visiting with us. Thank you.
Before you close, I noticed we have one very distinguished guest come in. You probably wouldn't introduce him. He's a kind of a white-haired guy in the back of the room, a fellow I consider the dean of tax accountants that I've known for my entire adult lifetime. Standing out tonight right there, pride of Griffin, Georgia. We're glad to have you with us. Thank you. This is his son, our chairman.
I wanted to announce or to give the opportunity. I know we've got remaining meetings. Meeting number 5 and 6 are announced. Representative Parrish, you want to tell us about the meeting that's coming up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On August 30th, that'll be on Wednesday, we'll be in Swainsboro. The meeting will be at East Georgia College. It'll start in the morning at 9 o'clock till about noontime. We'll be dealing with small business issues, taxing how it relates to interstate and border communities, as well as how it relates to economic development throughout the state.
Thank you.
Invited by
Representative Mills, I know you have the meeting after that. Would you like to give us a little information on your meeting?
We'll be dealing with fairness and equity, both some local and state, and then we'll also be looking at the state reserves and the treasury. Is that sufficient?
And that's going to be, what, the 21st?
September the 21st, be at Lake Lanier Island.
And I know Representative Martin, there's a final meeting, and I think we're still working on the details of that, the time and topic and everything, and I'm sure we'll announce that in one of the upcoming meetings.
I believe, Chairman, I don't know if I'm correct, I believe that's going to be our wrap-up meeting, so
Okay.
given the amount of input we get in the next 2 meetings, Chairman will decide what the timing of that needs to be and the location, so we'll discuss with him.
Mr. Chairman, any closing words?
Could we get Representative Parrish to send us some suggestions of where we might want to stay since we're starting at 9 o'clock?
And to all the presenters here today, for those who haven't left, if there's information that's been requested, can we please see if we can get that to Ward Lamb? He's in our committee services, and he would be happy to pass that out to all the committee members and our senators. Thank you, and I appreciate you coming out, and the meeting is adjourned.